Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining Ignite's Ask the Experts on Transform Your Windows Server Workloads in Azure. We have product and technical experts on the line who can answer any one of your Windows Server questions. Questions might include what we just announced, the latest news, and anything else you want to know more about. In this session, you'll use the chat to ask questions. Once you ask a question, it will be approved by our moderator and visible to all attendees. You can upvote your favorite questions to make sure they get visibility from our experts, and experts will answer questions verbally and over chat. We will provide Learn More resources once the session concludes. Some things to note during the session: it may be recorded, and please keep the questions product focused. Lastly, please adhere to the Microsoft Code of Conduct. As a review, here is the Microsoft Code of Conduct. I'll give you a minute to read it over. Okay, now on to our experts that we have on the line. We have Jeff Woolsey, Principal Program Manager of Windows Server. We have Dean Wells, Principal Program Manager of Azure Management. Ned Pyle, Principal Program Manager of Windows Server. Ben Armstrong, Principal Program Manager of Virtualization. We also have Megan McCrory, Senior Program Manager of General Compute. Subodh Bhargava, Senior Program Manager of Base PM. Jing Lee, Senior Program Manager of Base PM, and Weijuan Shi Davis, Senior Program Manager of Base PM. And then we have our moderators. We have Liam Sosinski and myself, Diana Marks. And we also have a special guest, Manfred Helber, MVP. All right, and I'll leave it open to the first question. All right, we got an anonymous question. How does Azure Hybrid Benefit work?
I guess I can go ahead and jump into that. So the way Azure Hybrid Benefit works, it gives organizations the ability to use your on-premises Windows Server licenses with software assurance to pay reduced VM rates. And so essentially what you're doing is you're applying your SA benefit to the Azure Hybrid Benefit to Azure. And so customers typically can save up to 40% on Windows Server VMs with the Azure Hybrid Benefit for Windows Server. If you combine this with something like Azure Reserved Instances, you can save up to 80%. Yeah, that's right. I said 80 as in 80. So it's a pretty huge savings. So if you combine, again, the Azure Hybrid Benefit with Reserved Instances, and the way Reserved Instances works, it basically allows you to optimize costs and across predictable and variable workloads. So if you know you have some workloads that are going to be pretty static, you're going to be running these for the next 12 to 24 months, go ahead and reserve those. Use your Azure Hybrid Benefit and save lots of money. So that's kind of a quick description of the Azure Hybrid Benefit.
Thanks, Jeff. We also have another question coming in about one of our latest announcements, Azure Auto Manage. Is Azure Auto Manage available outside of Azure?
I'll take that one. Azure Auto Manage is only available in Azure right now. We know maintaining and operating servers on premises can be complex and time consuming. And, Windows Server admins are responsible for day-to-day administrative tasks such as, backup, disaster recovery, and security updates. And also with the compounding security threats, ensuring apps and data remain secure against growing security threats compounds this administrative burden. So with that, Azure Management and Governance Services offer the opportunity to alleviate lots of these pain points. However, customers need to keep pace with cloud innovations as they become available. And, with Azure Auto Manage, we've been able to address these challenges with a service that, can help customers reduce daily management tasks with automated operations across the lifecycle of Windows Server virtual machines. However, it is just available for Windows virtual machines right now. So check it out in Azure.
And one really great thing to think about, just to build on what Liam said, because I totally agree with everything he said here, is think about your role as an IT pro and the day-to-day work that you do managing the life cycle of your virtual machines and your apps. It's not just deploying. It's I have to deal with things like configuration management, events and log analytics, backup, monitoring, security, access controls, update management. And the good news is, Azure has been providing a whole bunch of these capabilities, configuration management, log analytics, backup, update management. These are things that Azure has had forever. But what we find out is people, deploy their virtual machines and realize, hey, you know what? I really would like to onboard these VMs and take advantage of these services. And generally what they find out in pretty short order is, well, you know what? There's a bunch of these I'm going to automatically use. I'm going to automatically use monitoring. I'm going to automatically use backup. I'm automatically going to use log analytics, and probably maybe even enable something else like change tracking and inventory. And all of a sudden now you come up with these set of services that you want to apply to every virtual machine. Well, that's where Auto Manage comes in. Auto Manage basically allows you to say, hey, you know what? As an organization, my organization is going to standardize on a number of these services, and every time I deploy a VM, I want it to be auto-managed. And more importantly, we take our best practices for Azure, we take our best practices that Microsoft has, and we use those to help manage your virtual machines. And it's going to help reduce your operations, make your life better, make your life more predictable, and just improve your reliability. And so that's some of the thinking behind Azure Auto Managed.
Great, thanks guys. Another question about one of our other announcements. What is the value of offering Windows Admin Center in Azure?
I'm going to go ahead and jump on that. So when it comes to Windows Admin Center, first of all, this is a product we released 3 years ago. It has been growing like wildfire ever since. When we first released Windows Admin Center, it had a handful of tools in it, and it's been growing and growing and growing and adding more features and capabilities. And in fact, we have a pretty vocal group of enthusiasts around Admin Center that have been using it for years now, and they were using it to manage their on-premises, they're using it to manage their Windows servers. In fact, last Ignite, I ran into a number of customers that were managing, I'm not kidding, over 25,000 Windows Server instances, physical, virtual, running in a variety of different places, and they loved it. And so they couldn't get enough of it. And one of the challenges people said is, we're using it on-prem, and when we go to Azure, we would like to be able to use some of that functionality in Azure as well. And from an Admin Center standpoint, we've always had the philosophy that Admin Center is not going to duplicate anything that Azure does, and we want Azure and Admin Center to be very complementary. And so that's been the philosophy the whole time. Well, it turns out Azure has some things that Admin Center can do, and Admin Center can help out Azure and make them more complementary. And a perfect example of that is actually the inline RDP client. Turns out people will go up into Azure and they'll be, deploying their VMs, configuring their VMs or something like that, and actually want to go inside and actually, remote into the VM. Today, without Admin Center, you have to click on the connect button. You have to download an RDP file, and then you run a local RDP session on your PC that's actually, RDPing into that VM. With Admin Center embedded into the Azure portal now, what we're seeing is essentially now you have an RDP client embedded in the web, in the web console. So now on any device, a Mac, a Chrome book, it doesn't matter. We can actually RDP into that. And of course, you can take advantage of the other services too, certificate management, event management, and more. So again, we think of it as complementary. Don't think of it as either or. We think they work great together.
Great. And so this next question looks like it's for you, Ben. What specific scenarios do I use Azure Kubernetes service on Azure Stack HCI?
Yeah, happy to jump in and chat about that. So when we were building AKS on Azure Stack HCI, there were really 3 scenarios that we were looking at. The first one is we're seeing that today AKS is one of our fastest growing properties on Azure. We have lots of customers who are using AKS, they're writing apps on AKS, they're really liking that platform. But those customers are then finding that they have various needs to take those apps and run them in their data center. And in doing that, they don't want to have to make huge amounts of investment in supporting that. And that is, our first motivation for doing this is taking those cloud native apps that people have been building in AKS and letting them run them in their data centers when they have a business need to do so. The second scenario that we've been focusing on is we know that we have a lot of customers who have a huge investment in .NET applications in their infrastructure. And they're trying to figure out, okay, what's next for these applications? How do I keep them modern? How do I keep them up to date? And AKS on Azure Stack HCI allows you to take those applications, containerize them, modernize them, and continue to run them on your infrastructure with enterprise-grade support and reliability that you need while modernizing and moving forward. And the final scenario that we've looked at is we've talked to a lot of customers where they're going, yeah, we're really excited about Kubernetes. We have development teams who have been exploring this. They've been building new apps already for it. But boy, howdy, no one wants to invest the time to stand up, support, and run a full Kubernetes infrastructure themselves. So with AKS HCI, we've made a huge amount of investment in drastically simplifying the process for deploying it and for managing it and maintaining it. And those are really the three main scenarios that we look at.
Hey, Ben, I noticed that one of the questions that we have in the Q&A is about the deployment. Can you talk a little bit about the deployment of AKS on Azure Stack HCI?
Yeah, it is. I would strongly encourage people to go try it out. It is mind-blowingly simple. From an end user point of view, there are two phases. The first phase is taking an Azure Stack HCI deployment and making it ready to deploy AKS clusters. This process is literally about a 5-page wizard through WAC. You install the extension, you say, I want to turn this into an AKS host. 5-page wizard, we ask you very simple questions, and we then download all the components, we set everything up for you, and when we're done, we then say, okay, we're ready to go. And then the second phase is you can now deploy Kubernetes clusters on Azure Stack HCI exactly the same way you do with AKS. And once again, super simple. And my favorite thing is you can go from just a plain Azure Stack HCI deployment to enabling AKS, deploying Kubernetes clusters, deploying apps on those Kubernetes clusters without ever seeing or touching an operating system. So you don't have to worry about managing Windows, managing Linux, everything. It is really, really easy.
So to build on that a second, I love what Ben is saying there. The ease of use is a big part of how we think about Azure Stack HCI and AKS on Azure Stack HCI. If you've been using Admin Center, you've been watching as we've been adding more features and more capabilities. And a big part of what we enabled in the last year was the ability to deploy a hyper-converged cluster all from Admin Center. And so we created this whole wizard now where you can deploy an Azure Stack HCI. We literally walk you through it step by step. And spoiler alert, the version we released today actually has made that even easier. We added more features and functionality there. Well, then Ben and his awesome team took that and they built on top of that paradigm. Again, they built a wizard to make deploying Kube really easy, because guess what? Trying to deploy, if you've never deployed a Kube cluster before, how do you deploy it? How do you manage the life cycle? How do you secure it? I mean, Ben, come on. How many customers did you talk to that said, oh my gosh, we can't figure this out?
Yeah, and that is one of the key things that we looked at is there's not just the complexity of the initial deployment, which is certainly hard enough. There's also the importance of keeping it up to date. And with AKS HCI, once you're deployed, it is then kept up to date automatically for you. There's many components involved in pulling together a Kubernetes cluster, but we manage and service all of those. And all you see is a periodic notice that there's an update to apply. You apply it and you move it along.
That is awesome.
Okay, so we have an upvoted question. So what's next for the Windows Server in the on-premises data centers?
Oh my goodness. Go right ahead, Ned, please.
You want to take this one?
No, I want you to.
we're not supposed to talk about this kind of stuff, but I own a bunch of the features coming, and I don't care what anybody says. So I'll talk about whatever I feel like. You'll start seeing right now, if you go to Windows Server Insider, you can start downloading the next version of Windows Server now and start actually trying it out in your lab. And it's been available for about a month now. We've had a couple of builds come out. So the first question that everybody asks is there going to be another version of Windows Server? And right there, I can show you. You can go download it right now. There's a next version of Windows Server, and there'll be one after that, and one after that, as Jeff likes to say. They'll be making them long after he's retired, and he's not planning on retiring soon. A few things I can talk about right now that I own, and I've started to sneak some of this information out in the public already yesterday, would be some things like we are adding an entirely new protocol for use with SMB called QUIC. And QUIC is for example, an interesting new protocol coming along to replace TCP for a lot of stuff. The Edge browser uses it, and it's an interesting, very secure, very internet-friendly protocol. It lets us create things like VPN tunnels without having a VPN. And SMB servers will have this option in the future for you to be able, for example, set up an Edge node running in Azure or running on something like Azure Stack HCI, for example, sitting there on the edge, being able to connect to servers through what is always a TLS tunnel, but looks like SMB to your apps, looks like SMB to your users, because it is SMB, you're just running inside of it. And that's some of the more like real bleeding edge stuff we are doing. I mean, you can think about it from a pandemic response perspective of how many users you have right now working from home, and how many customers I've talked to just struggling with the idea of getting VPNs to work on oftentimes people like personal computers, or through machines that had to go to the house that were never configured or really ready to be a gigantic, massive remote network. And some of that state-of-the-art stuff we're bringing along to Windows Server is very much for that mobile remote type user, for example. I let a little secret out yesterday that we're adding a bunch more migration technology, a bunch more SMB technology. AS256 support for SMB, migration of NetApp seems kind of nifty. So if you've got NetApp FASs and you're looking to get into Windows or into a Microsoft ecosystem, the ability to use a storage migration service and migrate straight from NetApp onto a Windows cluster, for example, and your users and apps and clients will not be able to tell did anything happen. Once we're done with it, it'll look exactly like it did before. SMS has been in Server 2019 for a while now, and we keep adding scenarios like that, trying to help you get either more modern off old operating systems, or as we've started to add scenarios like Samba or NetApp, just get off of other platforms and get into something that you wanted to use either in Azure or on-prem with Windows. And there's a ton of stuff. Like I was just looking here, you probably saw me looking to my other monitor, at like the list of stuff inside of those Windows Server Insiders, and I started to like take some notes and want to like talk about them, and there was too much to talk about. So I really just recommend you go read those blog posts and start seeing this stuff and getting your hands dirty with it.
And also I put this in the chat window, and I know Rowan mentioned this in her session as well, but we are doing a Windows Server Summit. So that's going to be coming very, very soon. Keep in mind, one of the interesting challenges we have with doing virtual summits like Ignite, I had a number of people, I've heard both sides of this. On the one hand, I've had people tell me, you know what, Jeff, you don't have enough breaks. You need more breaks between sessions. I've heard people tell me the opposite, that you need more sessions and they need to be longer sessions. So, I think we're kind of hearing it, we hear both sides of it, and we're trying to make sure we deliver the best for all. At the same time, we know we can't do 100 sessions on every topic because people will just, screen fatigue is real. I mean, Satya even mentioned this in his very, opening keynote. So because of that, we said, you know what, let's have a dedicated Windows Server Summit where we can really focus on this topic. And so we, Windows Server is very much in Ignite as well, but we're going to focus on even deeper and specifically spend time talking about that on our on-prem investments coming up. So I included the link in the chat window as well at aka.ms/Windows Server Summit. And yes, as Ned mentioned, we do have insider builds that you can try out today.
Okay, we have another upvoted question in the chat. All templates in Azure are using Windows Data Center Edition. Is there a plan to release Windows Standard Edition templates?
I can probably, I don't think any of us is actually qualified to answer that, but I can tell you that I do a lot of work with the Azure images right now, and I don't believe we have any plans to release standard. I'd be interested in understanding the desire, since you would probably pay the same.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question either, Ned, because on Azure, we want to give you the full deal, and that's why you get data center. So yeah, sorry, don't know. I don't know of any plans. Of course, you could always upload it if you really wanted to have your own standard image up there, but that's why we provide a data center one, so everybody has a standardized one that they can use.
Okay, we have another question. Will further development still happen for Active Directory file sync in new server OS, considering the rich feature set in Azure Active Directory single sign-on?
Active Directory Federation server is what the FS means in that one. I don't think there's anybody on the call beyond perhaps Ned and myself that could comment on that, but I certainly don't have any up-to-date information on ADFS in terms of Federation server. Ned, do you?
No, I mean, a lot of the effort's really just gone into the regular AD Connect AAD to ADDS scenario. So I don't have any updated news on ADFS now.
Yeah, that doesn't mean there isn't anything. It simply means that Ned and I are woefully ill-equipped to answer that question since we're not up to date, so apologies.
The one thing I would say, and I'll let Ned and Dean disagree, but the one thing I keep hearing from customers is, when it comes to AD, certainly people go, I'd love to be able to just move everything up to Azure AD and call it a day. If you're building new apps and OAuth is will work for your new apps, party on. But generally, what I hear from customers, they still got some legacy things out there that require Kerberos, that have some, legacy compat. For those folks, they're just using standard domain controllers on-prem, but pretty much everybody is using AD Connect and federating it. This way you get that complete, consistent identity from on-prem into the cloud, and allows you to provide identity management. So if you haven't done that already, that's certainly something you should do. And the last thing I would say is, and if you're not, up to date on your domain controllers, I don't know how many times I get asked this, Ned, but someone asks me about, their domain controllers and what's the latest features, and then I ask them what version of their domain controller they're running, and they say 2008 R2, and I kind of want to slam my head into the table. It's like, well, why aren't you on a 2019 domain controller? Why are we even having this conversation? So please, if you're not at least at a minimum of 2016 for your domain controller, at the minimum, that should be your target. So please make sure, be on at least 2016, 2019 preferable, use ADFS, get that connected, get that synced, get your hybrid identity under control.
Even without, just to add to that, even without running, let's say that you get to 2019 and your Active Directory functionality is approximately the same as, say, 2016. There's an enormous amount of other security functionality on that 2019 platform that AD benefits from, that all roles benefit from. That when you're talking about like basically the most important, some of the most important servers you own, other than maybe your application databases that run your company, are the domain controllers themselves. And when you're back in 2012, and you're back in 2008, even when you're back in 2016, you're missing a significant amount of protection value that comes from 2019, for example. And if you want to get more, up to speed on migrations and stuff, we actually have some plans here about this. I'm not going to talk about too much right now, but if you, for example, just wanted to be able to migrate, that's a baked-in process of Active Directory that can be done with relative ease right now. And it's always been part of that system. And there's a ton of functionality that I harp about all the time that people aren't making use of from existing AD, like Kerberos fast armoring and GMSAs and a whole lot of stuff that is not actually heavily utilized that you could be using right now, that I would love for people to dig into and make sure that they're getting the most out of the Active Directory that they've got.
Okay, back to Azure Auto-Manage, would somebody like to describe the prerequisites for Azure Auto-Manage?
The prerequisites are negligible, to say the least. At this particular point, it needs to be a virtual machine. It needs to be running in Azure. And for the moment, it needs to be running Windows Server. We will eventually extend it to support Linux. Timelines on that are unclear because we've got a long path in front of us. But beyond that, the only other prerequisite that we're sort of encountering as we bring it out into the world of public preview is VM size. We've been struggling with some of the smallest possible VMs, like a B1 with half a gig of memory and a couple of vCPUs, and it just doesn't quite have enough horsepower to run the OS, the workload, as well as the additional things that we're making demands of it to do for the auto-managed extensions that run inside the VM. Beyond that, the prerequisites are negligible. There is also, if you take a look in the portal from the public preview links that were advertised earlier on, we added eligibility criteria, so you can actually go in and when you say enable an existing VM as auto-managed, there's a checkbox in that object picker, that browser, that allows you to show ineligible VMs, and it will explain to you why that individual VM is ineligible. A couple of the other factors right now, all of which we hope, as he crosses his fingers, will be removed very, very shortly, are things like log analytics workspace that happens to exist in a different subscription to the VM. We're currently working on a couple of bugs that we found in that area, so for the moment, that would render a VM ineligible. But beyond that, it really comes down to don't use the smallest possible VM. It has to run in Azure and it needs to be running Windows Server. Within a couple of weeks, I'm hoping that that will literally be the entry criteria and nothing more.
And Dean, one question I've been asked on this, is there any domain or non-domain join requirements about auto-manage?
Couldn't care less. Nope. Can be brand new, can be greenfield, brownfield, don't care whether it's domain joined, AAD, hybrid joined, doesn't matter.
You heard it from Dean.
Okay. Now, we know that Windows Admin Center just came out with their 2009 release. Can we hear a little bit more about some of what came about in that release?
Oh my goodness. Oh, there's so much. Prasid,
Jeff,
are you on?
Tell him about my thing, Jeff. Tell him about my thing.
I will. Let me just make sure. Prasid, is Prasid on? I don't want to steal his thunder.
No, I'm right here. Am I unmuted?
There you are, Prasid. Go, my friend.
All right. Oh man, we have an absolute ton. Well, since Ned already mentioned, I gotta highlight Ned's work. He has helped develop a brand new file shares tool. It used to be hidden under the storage extension for those of you that may have ever found it, but now it's under the files tool. So please do check out the new file shares tool. But beyond that, of course, all of you have already seen some of the stuff with AKS HCI, the new deployment flow. We made changes to our cluster deployment flow for Azure Stack HCI, bringing in SDN as part of the flow. Currently, it's kind of a long process, but I encourage everyone to give it a try. It takes about an hour to deploy SDN using Windows Admin Center, and then an absolute ton of improvements to the virtual machines tool. We brought in maybe 6 or 7 new features to the VM tool, and we're continuously working to do so. We've already had a few bugs reported on that, and we're working to fix them and deploying an update coming up very soon. Beyond that, we got some new color. I don't know if everyone likes color as much as I do, but I thought Windows Admin Center looks pretty snazzy with some new color. And we've also made some significant performance improvements across the tool. I'm hoping a lot of you noticed that loading tools and just using Windows Admin Center in general is significantly faster. And I could go, man, the list of these past 2 months we've done is quite a lot. But if you just visit aka.ms/WAC2009, you'll get a whole list of everything that's new.
So I got to add some more to that. First of all, this new release is awesome for Admin Center. So for the core tools, as Prasid, he's being a little humble. Prasid is the man when it comes to Admin Center. He's being super humble. For the VM tool, we have a whole new menuing system. So we had so many features added to the VM tool over the years that it was just we needed to rationalize it. We have a whole new menuing system. It's beautiful. We have a clone tool. So cloning VMs, click on a VM, clone the VM. If it's a Windows VM and you need to sysprep it, it's got sysprep integration. You now have the ability to domain join a guest operating system without having to RDP into it. It actually do it for you. So this is super killer and super awesome. So we got domain join, we've got cloning. There's also live storage migration. So last year we added full live migration. The one that was remaining was live storage migration, and that is in there as well. So that's just for the VM tool. And of course, the file storage, the file sharing tool now, getting a first-class upgrade. It's much easier to get to. It's right where it belongs. I've been using it pretty much nonstop. I love it where it is. It's fantastic. If you look at other just general performance improvements, you'll notice things are a little bit snappier here and there all over the place. That's continued work. You're going to see more work done for performance and scalability. We also got a bunch of updates from our partners. So it's a huge shout out to Dell, HPE, Data On, and more. So we got some nice updates across the board there as well. So for the core VM tools itself, we got that, you know, that huge swath of capabilities. On top of that, then you've got the AKS on Azure Stack HCI deployment. So now you have the ability to deploy a Kubernetes cluster. Again, if you've never done it before, you know, it's not the easiest thing if you've never done it before. Well, as Ben said, it's literally walking through a wizard. So really taking a complicated challenge like that and making it much, much easier. And then, of course, Admin Center in the Azure portal. Now the ability to actually fire up Admin Center, get an inline RDP client, and take advantage of those features from your favorite tool while you're up in Azure. So yeah, we've been really busy. Huge kudos to the Admin Center team, and we've got, again, lots more. We still have a laundry list a mile long. So for anybody who's saying, Jeff, you didn't get the feature, Prasid, we didn't get the feature I wanted, trust me, it's on there. We're working on it. We just got lots of features on it.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, we're at time. Thank you, everybody, for joining this Ask the Experts session. We appreciate your active participation and hope that you have a great day.